Hello everybody and welcome back to Brewmasters, where we're talking to accomplished homebrewers for D&D 5th edition. Today we're speaking to Mike from Mage Hand Press, the man behind the middle finger of Vecna Homebrews, who turned his hobby into a business and just recently finished his first Kickstarter for a new campaign setting. Now, just before we get into that, a quick reminder that if you're enjoying the series so far, do me a solid, hit that like button, subscribe, and make a reckless attack against that bell icon so you get notified as soon as another episode of Brewmasters comes out. It lets me know that you like what we're doing here, and of course, if you have any suggestions for topics, homebrewing advice you're looking for, ideas for new spots in the interviews like Homebrew Challenge that we just introduced, or maybe you have someone in mind you'd love to see on Brewmasters, just leave a comment below and I'd love to hear what you think. It really helps me shape the show so we're doing more of what you want and less of what you don't. So without further ado, let's dive on in. Mike, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you for your patience waiting there.
You're okay. No, take your time. So you're in the UK. I can tell that from the time zone, also the accent. But where are you in the UK?
Oh, I'm in London, West Side.
One of my artists is in that area.
Oh, that's fantastic. Do you know whereabouts?
I'm not exactly sure. I try not to pester them too much. Anybody too much about where they live or what they're about. It just as a matter of politeness. We're all just internet folks.
Yeah, of course. And I'm not trying to dox anyone here. But hey, let's get into it. So let's get to know you a little better. We'll start with something nice and easy. So what was the first tabletop role-playing game that you ever played?
I think I dabbled with Pathfinder first, but I really got into it with D&D 3.5. I guess a lot of my writing career has been kind of an echo of where D&D 3.5 was when I found it, which is this sprawling mess of first-party stuff and third-party stuff and stuff that's between it. D&D 3.5 was this massive landscape of classes and prestige classes and feats, and it was very player forward. You were supposed to tinker with it and find your build, and there was a huge gap between an optimized thing and an unoptimized thing, and it really kind of invited you to get lost in the weeds. And that's where I started with 3.5. And when I moved to 5th edition, when 5th edition came out, I loved how modular it was. I loved how simple it was, but it didn't have that breadth of content, that ability to get lost in the weeds. There was no sprawling chaos, and I wanted the sprawling chaos. So I started making stuff to try to, bring some of that sprawling chaos forward with us to 5th edition.
Yeah, I had pretty much the exact same experience. I started with 3.5, loved the sheer amount of splat books. Like, even the badly written ones were some of the best. Just like the ideas that were put out there, and you could just use everything. Like, they had a rule for everything. It was super granular. And then, we recently, I think it was about 3 years ago, updated to 5th edition. And it was alluring with its simplicity, but little did we know.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing because it definitely brings more people in, and I value that so much. It is great having new players and new blood and being able to just teach it to anybody in a few minutes. That's amazing. And personally, I enjoy playing 5th edition more because at the table, combat goes faster. I don't get lost in the weeds. It's more fun to do kind of small stuff. But yeah, there's something to that, I think it's been attributed to Mike Merles calling it lonely fun. That D&D that you play on your own, where you build characters and paint miniatures, and D&D isn't something that happens just at the table. It's something that happens elsewhere too. So 3.5 had a lot more of that lonely fun, and 5th edition doesn't really have it anymore as much.
That's interesting, actually.
It's this different angle that you can bring in when you start engaging with lots of homebrew and third-party stuff, or even just, the first-party stuff is finally catching up. They're finally releasing a little bit more, maybe with the new Tasha's book coming out. We'll get more content so that players can genuinely start getting lost.
Yeah, so I was recently talking to, just today with two of my players, about elements of 5th edition that seem to be missing that we used to feel like we had in older editions. And it's a little different for everyone. But I think for me, definitely that lonely fun, like the idea of, as you say, like generating characters and building like just like sifting and rifling through all the options, kind of like a person at a record store, like conjures those images of going through feats and character options.
Yeah, it's a toy box, right? And you want to see what's at the bottom of it.
Exactly.
Just keep digging and figuring out how everything fits together when you build your toy set.
Yeah, 100%.
So one of the big things, and we'll talk a lot about the different stuff I've made in particular. We have a big Kickstarter project that just wrapped up, and I'm actively working on the next big project. But one of the things I really like focusing on are making base classes that are feel like they're really expanding the edition. So we have a warden and a witch and an alchemist and an investigator. Things that aren't, too narrow, but aren't too broad, and really do feel like they're doing something new with the mechanics that you can't get out of the core classes. By just expanding those options, I've really remedied a lot of my players who kind of felt like their characters were getting stale or that they didn't have enough potential to do interesting things in the edition when they're building characters and when they're playing them. So that's one thing they should really be doing within 5th edition, and they really haven't, right? They've introduced one new base class in the 5 years D&D 5th edition has been out.
Yeah.
So we're from 12 to 13, and the Artificer is, not super broad, not super applicable, not for lack of trying.
It took a real like turn there at the end of its development as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think they pushed it out because they really wanted to get Eberron out, and we're still lacking a lot of that content that used to be in earlier editions. And I think there's some strategy to this on Wizards of the Coast's part, or rather Hasbro's part, who's kind of, I think, forcing their hand. They don't want to put out too much content because they want to make sure this edition lasts a good long time. I'm not really complaining. This has given me a lot of space to make cool and interesting stuff. But it does feel like unless you're enhancing your D&D experience within a couple of campaigns, you're kind of going to run low on the stuff. The genres and the classes and the party roles that you can make without applying a ton of personal imagination.
Absolutely. And as you say, we benefit from this as well in that our homebrew ends up becoming something that can last as well.
Yeah, we're kind of laying out the pavement in front of the car in many ways, because D&D as a whole would not be it wouldn't be a thing if Wizards of the Coast this edition of D&D wouldn't be where it is without Wizards of the Coast giving us that open gaming license, the OGL, and just saying hey, you can make stuff and not get destroyed by our lawyers. And that's extremely useful for us, right? And I think it's their survival strategy as well, because they know that if they're not producing enough stuff, they have this community who is self-sustaining. And it's quid pro quo in a way. Yeah,
definitely. Although I've definitely had people comment that maybe there are actually already too many classes, which, I mean, personally, that shocks me because I'm so used to as you say, 3.5 having 10 billion options available, being cut down to 5 and being and there are people this is too many.
Yeah, I understand that too. It's a difference of baseline, right? But I think new players are going to look at things like the ranger, the sorcerer, probably the monk, the druid. Look at some of those classes and go this feels a little narrowcast. We can talk about some of those classes even being problematic. They shouldn't have published the monk in this edition, in my opinion, because it's they put this out in 2015, right? We knew that wuxia is not the most deft handling of culture. So yeah, I think new players, look at that, 12 classes, many subclasses, and think that's probably enough. But I think ultimately it's a question of how the mechanics and the lore are handled in those classes.
Definitely. And this was actually something I was thinking about again recently with, in my own time, I'm working on a campaign, and I was thinking how do you take Orientalism out of the monk without just not having monks?
The answer is don't use monks if you can. That's a real big problem because the monk is mechanically one of the more interesting classes in the edition. It is doing stuff that other classes are not. It is doing more attacks with lower damage, and it has the ability to use an expendable resource to even do more attacks. It's super interesting up to like 5th level, and then after that it's like kind of a poor, and from a design perspective it's very poor because they just start adding stuff onto it.
Yeah, like with
the base class. Well, you can turn ethereal at 1 level. You're immune to all disease. It's like stuff that's so specific you shouldn't be putting it in a base class. And it feels like they're grasping for straws because they didn't, it seems like they knew what they were doing for the first 5 levels of that class and didn't really know what they were doing for the rest of it.
They ran out of tropes,
but
right?
This is yeah, exactly. And then they're just leaning on like weird specific tropes, which is maybe not it's certainly not the best for a character build. And in my opinion, they should have taken the bard and the monk and given them like sets of features. Maybe the bard could have picked their songs off a list. Maybe the monk could have picked special moves off a list so that you get more customizability, like much like the warlock gets. You get that customizability. It gives you a more modular chassis, so it doesn't feel as packed with features that you just can't remember, and it gives you more of an interesting balance curve. But those are the classes from a home brewing perspective, or a third party content perspective. You have to treat those classes like gospel. I can't make anything that just goes, here's a better monk or here's a better bard, because there's no reason anybody should trust me over Wizards of the Coast. But you do want to think deeply about these topics so that you can build stuff that is better. We've put out, over the last 5 years, we've been building base classes and really putting in a lot of effort and doing a lot of revisions on these. So, we've got about 10, 11 that I think are really, really solid. And we'd like to do hopefully next year, early 2021, we want to put together a Kickstarter that bundles 10 base classes in a book, along with just every subclass that we can get for the original 12 base classes. So maybe 60 subclasses, throw in some feats, exotic weapons, spells, the whole 9 yards. And I think we're going to have a product that is like a real definitive expansion for D&D 5th edition.
That seems like a very bold move, because I think my experience at least has been that within the homebrew community, making a base class is very contentious. Mm-hmm. Like a majority of people will always try and guide you towards making your idea into a subclass and trying to limit the amount of base classes that exist.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of that is, what ideas do you want to bring out, right? Like, what are you messing with? What do you want to do? Because most character ideas that third-party creators come up with are, they belong as a subclass, right? If you want to make a summoner, it should be like a wizard or a sorcerer subclass, maybe a warlock subclass, right? You're going to have to find some really interesting mechanics and some really interesting angles to make those stand out. And so what we've done with a lot of our base classes, I like to live by the design principle, describe this class with one word. So if you look at our witch, right? Our witch is debuff the class. It is all about taking your enemies and making them weaker. And they get a companion familiar as a class feature, which they can use, built into the chassis as something to exploit that weakness, right? They debuff somebody with a hex. They've got a familiar nearby to start, exploiting that. Obviously, your party exploits those weaknesses as well, but we build on that concept in every direction as we build out that class. And what you end up is with something it's a charisma fullcaster, but it plays radically differently because it has that focus built in from the beginning. And once you know that mechanical focus, you can start building out a base class that is interesting and is worth its own time. Like, it is worth people's attention, and it is worth its own subclasses. You don't want to build a base class that only is interesting with 3 subclasses, right? You want to really build that out so it has enough concept, that it can occupy its own space.
Absolutely.
So, we have an alchemist. We have an alchemist base class, which is all about bombs and potions and utility and stuff. There's a ton of space to build that out. You really don't want to take an alchemist and go, that's a subclass, which is what Wizards of the Coast did. And I think there's space for these interesting classes.
That's interesting.
Now, in general, I do agree with you. People, maybe jump the gun on base classes. They're also way harder to design. If you take any less than a few months designing a base class, like, you're probably not doing enough work on it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just having a quick look through my personal collection of homebrew. And I think from all the ones I've collated, I probably have about 50 unique base classes. And I'll admit, like, a lot of them could likely do much better if they were just downgraded to a subclass for any one class or another. But I think the few that definitely stand out are ones that I've picked up from Mage Hand Press.
That's great to hear. Yeah, and it's interesting as well, because this is really just a matter of what you want that class to be, right? I think people have really interesting base classes sometimes that like explore mechanics that you can't explore elsewhere in the game. But they don't feel like they're a natural extension of 5th edition.
That's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah, and that's really what we want everything that we make to be. We want to naturally expand 5th edition using the core concepts within 5th edition. Like, we don't want to step on some of the core tenets that make it what it is. So, there's that idea that in 5th edition that you don't want to add lots of +1s and +2s to make a score. Right, we're never going to do that in our base classes. We want to make sure that our base classes are, broad, but not too broad. There's all, these sorts of natural design trends that if you look really closely, you can see that they painted within lines. 5th edition they didn't just close their eyes and throw darts at a board. They set out their goals beforehand and then built stuff around those goals. So if you look closely, you can find what those goals are and try to follow them. If you just start making stuff, you may be able to make something very interesting, but in my opinion, it won't be as worthwhile as creating something that makes 5th edition better for your creation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm a huge sucker for mechanics. Like, there's one of these classes that I like, which is the Arcane Gambler. They have
neat,
some very interesting ideas with different subclasses for different types of gambling games. So you have a craps subclass, a slot subclass, and I think the other one was a poker one. And each of them revolve around you actually using that game as part of their mechanics. So when you attack, you roll a craps die, and if you get a particular result, it can add a bonus or a penalty to your attack. And if you sacrifice some money, then you get to roll 3 dice for a slot. And then that results in you getting a particular matching set, which then gives you a bonus or something. Really interesting ideas and mechanics. But it's distinctively lacking in how that ties into the universe and what the lore is behind why this happens.
All of those subclasses will look like the same character.
Exactly,
from a distance.
Yeah.
Which is, and again, it's one of those things I don't want to, I guess it sounds like I've been very negative here. I don't want to sound negative on those because those are really interesting mechanical directions to take the system. But when you're not, when you're experimenting like that, you're not going to create something that feels like a natural extension of the system. Something like that, could very easily be tied into a bard. It's actually funny that you bring up that type of gambling subclass, because we just we're actively working on 2 of those for our War Mage. Our War Mage class is Cantrips the class. They're really great with cantrips. They have cantrips like a fighter has weapons. They have this set of tools, and they can really wreck shop with it in spite of the fact that they only know 0th level spells. So, super interesting kind of design, but their subclasses are all based on chess pieces. Well, how do we naturally expand that? We've painted ourselves into a corner. Okay, let's give them some gambling types and base stuff on fairy chess pieces, like stuff that's from non-standard chess. Shogi is one of the subclasses we made recently. So, we're working on, expanding that out for, hopefully a giant big book coming early next year. But yeah, we managed to fit in some gambling games into the subclasses within this larger class, and it helps expand kind of the variety of characters that live under that umbrella.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And yeah, I don't think you're being negative at all. I think it is just a matter of these things happen. Obviously not every brew is, maybe I should rephrase that. Yeah, not every brewer is necessarily as experienced as any other, and although you might get some really fantastic ideas, they come off in a very raw form sometimes.
That's a really good way to put that. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think it's important to know what you want when you make stuff and when you play stuff as well, right? I don't look at the stuff I make as experiments. I don't look at it as like a community project. I look at the stuff I make as a product. I want people to, and even if it's free, you're buying it with your time, and I don't want to waste your time. So I want to make something that you like and that respects your time and your intelligence. And I think of it like a product. So it needs an elevator pitch, a selling point. I need stuff like that. So these kind of help guide my perspective on both my own work and the other work I look at. Can this work as a product? Which maybe sounds like entirely too corporate and too stale, but in some ways, if you think about it, there are advantages to thinking about something like a product. There is great stuff out there, but unless someone sells it to you, you won't know that it's there. You need that kind of elevator pitch built in. And if something's really cool, but you wouldn't know that because you had to dig through a bunch of stuff to find its cool center, wouldn't it be nice if that was on the packaging, right? These are kind of good ideas that you can work into your design, and the way you present your ideas. I would say 75% of writing for games is making sure that you make your ideas easily communicated, and a lot of this comes down to thinking about how you package it, essentially.
No, absolutely. And I think it comes back to what you were saying, I think just before we started recording, about how when you're a homebrewer, you draw in so many different skills from all different areas. And I think a lot of homebrew is, in fact, like reliant on transferable skills. And being able to draw on your business knowledge is fantastic, because you're right, at the end of the day, we are all producing our own little products, right? Like, it's most likely the reason that your particular work has probably become so successful, because you have this advantage.
Maybe, yeah, I hope so. I'm still not quite sure why my work has gotten as widely read as it has. I've designed it to be as widely digestible as I can. And people enjoy that. But I don't know. I think sometimes it's just a coin toss. I don't want to attribute to skill, but I can to luck. I've been very lucky. I mean that, right? So we just did a Kickstarter. This is maybe a good time to, since you were talking about, business knowledge. I just ran my second Kickstarter for Dark Matter. It's a book that takes D&D and just puts it into space. It's not a standalone system. It just sits on top of 5e. So if you know 5e, you can play Dark Matter, and now D&D is in space. It's a massive genre shift, but doesn't actually take that many rules. That's all advantageous for players and DMs alike. It's easy to pick up. It's fun, and it's still 5th edition through and through. That Kickstarter just ended. You can still pre-order if you're interested. And we made like $250,000. We hit almost all of our stretch goals. And it went super, super well. A lot of that comes down to, knowing what people want as best as you can and trying to make that.
It's fantastic to hear. Because, they're definitely, like, ever since 5th edition came out, all I've ever heard people asking for is like a Spelljammer type setting that they can dig into. And I don't know how closely yours resembles that at all.
That's actually a really interesting comment. Can you cast your mind back to 3.5 for a moment? Did you think that Spelljammer was well received back then?
I hadn't heard of it until very late in its life cycle.
Yes. So Spelljammer was really something that I don't think back when it was out was well received terribly. People didn't...
Did they release it for 3rd edition?
I don't remember if it was 3rd or 2nd. That's the thing. It was like Planescape was very big in 2nd edition, but Planescape kind of got its own life. Planescape has kind of survived because it had a video game that arguably the best CRPG of all time, and it has weaved its way into the background of D&D. Spelljammer was kind of weird because it's space, but it doesn't do anything with the sci-fi aesthetic.
No, it's really weird in that sense, because it's just like a fantasy, like, interpretation of space.
Yeah, and it's a fantasy interpretation of science fiction as well. So if you're like me and you're going, man, I want to play something that is science fiction. I want to play something that is, Star Wars or Warhammer 40K or Firefly, or Guardians of the Galaxy. When I watched that movie for the first time, I looked at it and went, "This is a D&D party."
Yeah,
it feels like it. You've even got the dumb, weird animal person. There's always one.
Yeah. That is 100% true.
Yeah. So, you look at that and you go, "I want to play that." Spelljammer doesn't accomplish that. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I got a small sidetrack there. But yes, even if they released Spelljammer, it wouldn't do what people want to do with science fiction. When you want to play science fiction, it's because you want to tell new and different stories. So you need something like Dark Matter, which looks and feels like science fiction. Now, Dark Matter is science fantasy when you look at it. You can still play a regular wizard. Spells are what powers all the technology. Like, all of the technology is just super advanced magic. And that's kind of fun, right? From a mechanical, conceptual level.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? It's, kind of an expansion of what Eberron was doing. So that means it fits in the core D&D kind of landscape, but it is sci-fi. It looks like sci-fi. It plays like sci-fi. So I have 100% stolen episodes from Firefly, adapted them slightly, and put them into my campaign. And it runs great. I know people who are running Warhammer 40k using Dark Matter rules. Dark Matter, and as much as it is a campaign setting, only like 30 pages of its 300-page length are lore. And a lot of that is art.
Amazing.
Yeah, so, and that's important, that it's easy to read, easy to pick up. It's not trying to drag you down a rabbit hole. I don't want to tell you all of the lore detail. I don't care. I hope you don't care. I want to make something for dungeon masters and players. And I think most people like to run something that they can claim ownership over.
Oh yeah, man. I tried to get into Eclipse Phase a little while ago. The lore for that is like 300 pages.
I'm so sorry.
I mean, it's an amazing game, but Jesus, it's impenetrable.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I mean, hey, that's 5th edition. I make stuff that is true to what 5th edition is. 5th edition is accessible. Make your games accessible. So Dark Matter is accessible. That's just part of following the design philosophy beginning to end, inside and out. I mean, I think that sort of philosophy is important when you build something. And accessibility is not something to be frowned on. I find people who look at stripping away complexity as somehow reducing it in some way, but often it opens it up to be plugged in to other things in more interesting ways. So, I guess I'm wildly off topic.
No, not at all. So I think I'm looking at the Kickstarter page and the artwork for the book covers. I'm seeing some classic fantasy stuff. You got like a griffin guy looking person. You got your gnome, massive skeletal dragon thing in the middle of a nebula. I mean, it looks amazing. I guess I'm curious then, would this feel to a player more like a campaign setting set within the astral realms, like or the astral plane?
No, I think it'll feel like space. I mean, that's the idea. It's the way we framed it. So, if you crack open the book, like one of the first pages is a galaxy map, and the lines by which it has been carved up by the various factions. So the Elven Empire is over there, the human hegemony is down there, the Dwarven Conclave is over there, and there are planets, and it is space. I think the astral plane has its own weirdness. And we don't write the planes out of Dark Matter completely, but we kind of, we like it if you focused on the space part, because frankly, if you start bouncing into the planes, you're going to ignore the vast, cool universe out there and, not travel as far. And that's kind of the idea. It's I don't want to say space opera, because you can play the exact genre, however you want. But it is a sci-fi thing.
Yeah, so I suppose, that clears up my point, because I wasn't sure if it was an expansion to, say, the material plane, or if it was a revision of the astral plane. And it sounds much more like that expansion.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, big material plane. Yeah, and it's I can see why the big space skull on the cover would trip you up. That's actually one of the weirder lore notes in the setting. So everyone's familiar with, or many people are familiar with Mass Effect or Stargate, how they have these portals that bring you from point A to point B across the universe.
Sure.
We've got the same thing, but they're giant space skeletons in space. And they've got black hole things in their mouths, and if you fly through that, you pop out somewhere else. It's pretty great.
That is pretty interesting. Yeah, it's like this whole like new fantasy nuance of the old trope.
Yeah, I mean, it feels fantasy. It's hard to look at that and say anything other than like, wow, that is some fantasy bullshit.
That's perfect, man. Like, if I'm in the middle of like a space-focused campaign, I'd love to hear that the way we're getting from point A to point B is through the mouth of a dragon.
Yeah, it's pretty great. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, my books do not take themselves very seriously. There is a cantrip in the back of the book called finger guns. If that gives you a sense of the way I write.
Fantastic.
And that's important to me as well. Personally, I am playing D&D with friends around a table. Nothing can be that gritty or that serious because the friends around the table aspect will break that down real fast. So I create stuff that is fun. I try very hard to make it fun and lighthearted, something you want to come back and play. So that's another part of the, if we're talking design philosophies, make it fun is somewhere near the top of the totem pole.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there must be groups out there who play D&D like very straight and serious, but they must be so few and far between from my experience.
I think part of this has to do with the way Dungeons and Dragons, we talked about this briefly, has changed now that it is the audience for Dungeons and Dragons, I should say, has changed now that the system has become easier to pick up. I think you can look at this firsthand if you're somebody who has, seen, the Twitterscape change around D&D. There are Hollywood actors playing weekly D&D sessions. That didn't used to happen. Like, it has become something that is not just in vogue, but something that is widely loved by people who are theater folks. Those people used to stay very far away from Dungeons and Dragons. It was too dense, too hard to get into. They would look at it and say, I don't like the math. With good reason, I think.
Yeah,
I didn't like the math.
Definitely. I usually call it the mercification of D&D.
The mercification? Perfect.
So I'm curious then, what new kind of mechanics or I suppose content beyond just like the expansion of the territory is provided in Dark Matter?
No, I mean, yeah, phenomenal question. We only have one new base class. It's a gadgeteer. You can actually port that back to fantasy if you want to talk about their gadgets as being magic items. And that way it can be a little like an artificer character. But for Dark Matter, it is a gadgeteer. They get an AI companion and a good blaster and tons of gadgets they can pick off of a list.
Very cool.
Other than that, 3 new skills. We knew that if we added too many skills, it would start breaking down the fundamental systems of D&D, so we only added 3. Technology, data, and piloting. And there are a lot of subclasses. 1 or 2 for every base class, plus subclasses for those Mage Hand Press classes that I've talked about. So you can start, taking those and adapting them into the book. And that's nice because it'll be forward compatible with our next book, which will be all about those base classes. Lots of feats, lots of backgrounds, lots of magic items, lots of monsters. Ton of monsters. Oh, and ship combat rules. It works a lot like regular D&D combat. Things have HP and AC. Mega HP and mega damage. A point of mega damage is 100 points of damage.
Very cool.
Easy to follow. So it's and it's actually nice because that means you can have that scale work with regular scale combat. It'll just kill you pretty instantly.
Yeah.
But it's logical. It's not like a completely separate system. It's there. Tons of monsters, which have to serve both the regular scale of combat and the mega scale of combat. So it's kind of a mixed bag, some that you'll fight at, lower and higher scales. And of course, there's tons of example ships and stuff like that. Oh, the other mechanic I like to talk about a lot are the blasters. Holy cow, I am proud of those blasters. They took a lot of math. So in addition to regular weapons, you've got blasters. Now, blasters deal 2 dice of damage, unlike a normal weapon, which deals 1. But you don't add your ability modifier to damage.
Okay.
This took a lot of math to get very right. So at all levels of play, they feel pretty good. Right? Your skill with blaster doesn't necessarily improve your damage. It'll just improve your accuracy a little bit.
For sure.
So yeah, this is kind of an interesting little subsystem. Our gunslinger class, which is all focused on critical hits, gets extra work out of those because now you're rolling 4 dice of damage instead of only 2. So it has this nice through line with the class that requires use of a lot of guns. They do good critical hits. And we've got some extra weapon properties that go into that. You can fire them automatically, and that means rolling twice, but all of your attacks always have disadvantage, period. And other mechanics as well. I'm really excited about those because they changed the texture of D&D a lot more than you would think. And there's something about rolling more dice that make the system really fun.
Yeah, that never gets old.
You'd be surprised how much a little change like that means to the system. Because if you do happen to roll 2 1s on your dice, well, that's when the shot wings you, right? Boom. And if you roll really, really well, you can say that's a headshot or something. Because the bounds of this damage scheme are a lot wider.
Yeah, and it makes a huge difference to everyone else to be able to roll a lot of dice rather than just the wizards and the sorcerers.
Absolutely.
So I see on your Kickstarter as well, you've teamed up with Wyrmwood.
Yeah, Wyrmwood, Level Up Dice, phenomenal companies. We really enjoyed working with them to get some branded merch. And they, oh man, I've got my Level Up Dice and my Wyrmwood vault right over there within arm's reach, and boy, they're nice. I was not a believer before I got those, and now I can wholeheartedly sell people on those very, very luxury dice. I mean, they're expensive, so if you're somebody who is living quite within your means, maybe stay away from them. But gorgeous dice.
100%, yeah. I think it's maybe seen within like the D&D community that if you have a time with Wyrmwood, that you've probably made it.
Maybe. That might be the case.
It looks very prestigious, definitely. Because, I mean, their woodwork is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess they are kind of hard to get in touch with, but we figured that out, so... Yeah, we just know a lot. Total side thing, and you may want to edit all of this out.
Oh, no problem.
It's not principally... So I do the writing and editing and graphic design. I have other writers who come in and help with things, but I'm the principal writer for most projects. But I don't run the company alone. I have a friend who came in on the first Kickstarter and really just wanted to help me run things like, getting contacts with people, making deals with streamers, stuff like that, which I don't have freaking time for. Nobody does. So he's the one who at conventions, I run the booth and hawk my wares at stuff and talk to people. He walks from place to place and makes contacts and goes out to drink with them afterwards and really, solidifies those relationships. So with most things, it's who you know. And so things like Wyrmwood, it's yeah, I guess for a giant company, for most companies, if you don't know them, yeah, you have to be big enough to get their attention just by your name. For us, we know people now because I have somebody whose job it is principally to know people and make friends and to get us those deals. So yeah, I mean, so what you say is yes, correct. I think for most of the time it is a prestigious thing. But as with all business things, it is who do you shake hands with? Who do you go to drink with?
That is interesting as well. Because I mean, I would say the vast majority of homebrewers don't necessarily have an incorporated kind of some kind of a company name to put themselves to. That is definitely something that makes you stand out.
I would argue that more people should. Now, this is a big debate within the D&D community, or maybe not just D&D, maybe everywhere, is do you put your name on the box? Do you say this is by Mage Hand Press, or do you say this is by Joe Schmo? I think there's an argument to be made both sides, right? I have a lot of writers who work with me. I have a very large art team. I have 7 artists working, well, 8 if you count some of the people who are on temporarily only to help with the Kickstarter. I have a very large art team that works almost exclusively for me. And several writers who come in and out to help me with all sorts of stuff, some on short-term stuff, some on long-term stuff. But principally, I'm just like a guy, right? So on one hand, it would be nice having that sort of recognition as, look at me, I'm that guy. But I don't really want that. And I think there's some advantage to being able to say, no, I'm an entity, I'm a company, and you can trust me like you can any company that is competent. Personal opinion, obviously. Your mileage may vary. It worked for me. But, my friend Benjamin Huffman, Sterling Vermin Press, puts his name on things. People know who he is. And I respect the crap out of that angle. He is, I consider, it's a fascinating difference between people like Ben and I, Sterling Vermin and I. Because he has a real job and a family, and I don't. I think I've accidentally turned D&D into my career, right? Because, while I was finishing up my computer science degree, the D&D stuff that I was doing kicked off, and now I make more doing Dungeons and Dragons than I would be at any computer science job.
But that's definitely the dream for most brewers.
I don't know. I don't know if it should be. Now, this is a weird thing to kind of come on the other side of this and say, yeah, maybe you don't want to.
Sure.
But, you have to be, you don't get to say, I am going to write stuff and make money writing. That is not what you are doing if you are what I am doing. You are responding to emails, you are setting up, you're making business decisions, you are building products. You have to be a graphic designer and an editor and a writer and a salesperson. You have to know everything there is to know about marketing. And that's true of you have to know everything there is to know about setting up a website. You have to know kind of everything there is to know about everything. The way you get paid to do that, like to do the writing, is by doing everything else all the time. So very little of my time is spent writing, compared to where it used to be. And it's hilariously stressful all the time. It's really rewarding getting to see the stuff that I've made turn into something big that people value. And I'm here to make it, to have people play my stuff and enjoy it. Like, I want people to enjoy that content. That's important to me. That they're taking it to their tables and having a good time with their friends. But principally what I am doing is running a business. I am doing middle manager stuff. So, know that is what you are getting into if you want to make this your full-time job. It is not, anything like what you'd expect it to be. Now granted, I'm not super disillusioned. I didn't think this was ever going anywhere ever. I just kind of kept building on it until it got huge. So I kind of stumbled into all of this, but I think most people have this idea that they want to write stuff and get paid for it. And that is ultimately not something that is true anywhere.
Yeah, there's very few publications which are going to be interested in what you're writing to start with. So unless you're creating your own, then doing it for free is really the only option, right?
Yeah, and this is a massively niche market. Yeah, and I started doing this for free. I did this for free for, I guess I've been writing D&D stuff for 5 years now. And, a year, nobody paid attention to me. Year 2, I started a Patreon. And then the next year, I built up that Patreon and, started building up a Kickstarter. And, if you're lucky, you can continue to build and continue to do stuff. But, I'm lucky. I got really lucky to get where I am. Some of this is hard work and dedication, but don't let anybody tell you that your hard work will get you anywhere, because most of it's luck.
That's so true.
I hate to burst people's bubbles on that, especially creators, up and coming creators. There are so many freaking talented people in this industry who love what they are doing. But you need to know that you should come at it like a hobby. Come at it like a hobby, where you're building stuff. You want to make stuff that people love. So hopefully you're going to build it in such a way that it makes a good product, right? But at the end of the day, it's a hobby until you get wildly lucky.
It's true. I think it's also important to bear in mind what your end goal is if you're really interested in getting into homebrew, like to this level, because it may be that you just want to publish your own book, which you can do very easily. We proved that when we were talking to Genuine Fantasy Press in the first episode.
Really? I love Genuine.
But yeah, he was a fantastic guy.
Oh yeah, he did. If I'm not, wonderful dude. I love him to death. You've been really making a circle, the circle to everybody that I know. If I believe he did his print, he didn't do a print run. He did a print and play, or a print.
Like print on demand.
Print on demand is the word. Yeah, he didn't do a print run. He did print on demand. This is massively different. We did a print run for our first Kickstarter, and on this one, we're doing a print run using a Chinese printer, a Chinese board game printer, right? The difference there is if somebody is paying $50 for your book, print on demand, you might make $5, maybe $10. If you do a small print run, you might make $30. If you do a big print run, you might make $45. You always think that if you wrote the thing, that you're going to make that massive portion per book. But that's simply not the case. Right? You really need to put in, you have to get massive numbers before you, and be able to have that money to throw it forward in order to get that sort of, margin that you can do stuff like sell it in stores. If you sell something in stores, you only make 40% of the sticker price. So on a $50 book, you only make $20 before the cost of the product. So when you look at stuff in stores, 50% of that money is going to the store itself. 10% of it is going to the distributor. Only 40% is going back to the creator. And at that point, a lot of it is probably going into the actual cost of production. So they have to do gigantic numbers or they fail. Small creators have the option to do print on demand and make smaller amounts. And, they're probably getting smaller audiences as well. So all of that's a feedback mechanism, right? You're not going to make that much doing it that way. So, this is all like inside baseball business talk. We're no longer in the, this is how I make stuff. And this is why writing D&D.
Oh, well, based on my metrics, this is what people pay more attention to, definitely.
I think this is what more, if you are a creator who wants to get bigger in the industry, learn everything there is to know about this sort of stuff as well. Learn everything there is to know, period. I watch a lot of GDC talks when I get the chance, even though it's not on tabletop gaming, because there's a lot to learn. Just about everything. You got to know everything there is to know about marketing. Like, how much do you know about marketing a product? How much do you know about email campaigns? These are dumb things that nobody learns for fun in their free time, but you have to if you want to do this professionally.
That makes total sense. And yeah, those GDC videos are incredible. Like, I bashed through a few of those a little while back, and yeah, amazing. Like, you will learn a surprising amount that's applicable to this realm of games without even realizing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Free resource too.
Yeah. I think it's something that a lot of people don't necessarily think about is having to have some kind of a business acumen or understanding, because at face value, when you're interacting with the product, it's usually through DM's Guild. You're going to be like clicking through there or on like someone's like website or something that they've set up with like some brews on there, like Born to Do Stuff. I think I talked to recently. He has a website that you can just look through all of his things. But yeah, if you want to sell things, people don't think that that's business because of just seeing it in the context of D&D.
Yeah. I talked to people a lot about the creator class structure, which is that you end up with the upper class, which is Wizards of the Coast, Paizo, Chaosium. There's massive companies, right? There's the lower class, which is the sea of people on DM's Guild and Drive-Thru RPG and other sites. And people who are just posting on Twitter and Reddit for free. That's always there, period. And not to, everybody begins at that level as well. But D&D 5th edition has gotten such large market penetration, and it has grown with such numbers that there is now this rising middle class of D&D content creators. People who are making books for Dungeons & Dragons and being able to have fairly large, successful products. So if you look at something like Humblewood by our friends over at Hit Point Press, that thing made $1 million. It's genuinely a phenomenal book.
I'm playing that at the moment.
Are you really?
Yeah, I'm
editing for them right now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're wonderful people.
Yeah, like my friend Eliza, she picked up the homebrew, and yeah, she's been running it, but she's been really frustrated because we're all on lockdown and she can't use any of the like physical materials like the maps and the cards, and it's been a real shame.
Yeah, and I consider, they're still, I think, in the middle class with me. They're maybe upper middle class, right? They're making much bigger Kickstarters than us. But their books are not in every store. They are not buying out huge wings of convention centers. They don't have a massive staff. And everyone who works there, amazing people. But it's important to kind of see the structure that you're working with, right? Most of the time, when you're making stuff for D&D, I don't think you come into it with business acumen. You don't come into it with knowledge of kind of where the landscape is and what the industry looks like. You start out on that lower class and you just try to get a big enough audience, you can go up to the middle class, and then you try to get a big enough audience, you can become one of the big boys. And that's a fantasy, right? You're probably never going to become as big as Chaosium or Paizo. And if you do, you're probably not going to have much to do with writing anymore, because those are gigantic companies who are mostly doing they're just doing product management.
Yeah.
Right? So these are like vastly different realms at every single magnification. If you want to just write stuff for D&D, focus on making good stuff that people like. Push stuff out where people are going to see it. That's important too. Like, social media is important because you want people to see. If you want somebody to like really love your stuff, like you love your stuff, make sure they can see it, or you're doing them a disservice by hiding your work. That's the way you need to think about social media, by the way.
That's a really good way of putting it.
It's not a dirty marketing thing. You're doing someone a service by letting them know that something exists that they will love. They're not going to complain if they find it and they love it, right? That's how hopefully people see our stuff and they love it as well. That's the goal.
Yeah, that's some amazing insights, because I mean, a lot of that even I hadn't quite I think I was starting to see parts of that, but you just blew things into proportion like amazingly.
Well, I'm glad to have provided some insight. We can go back to talking about fun D&D writing stuff if you want. I think we've basically hit the limit of everything I know and can teach about this little realm of business that we're in.
No, we can't go back now. We've come too far.
Let's zoom out even further. It's macroeconomics time. Let's talk about Chinese production lines. Go.
Oh, Jesus. It's better than subsidiary farming.
Actually, do you want to know the weirdest little tidbit that everyone should know if they're ever planning on doing a big print run of their books?
Oh, shoot. Yeah, absolutely.
Your books need to be divisible by 16 pages on the inside. Because small digital print runs, if you're doing print on demand, doesn't matter. They're just going to print basically digital pages, like printer pages, and then glue them into a book. If you're doing a big print run, like if you take one of your hardcover books and look at it side on, you can see the binding and that there's like little loops of pages.
Yeah.
It's like 16 pages at a time. Or 32 front and back. So you want to make sure that your pages are divisible by 16, because it will cost a lot more money to print a random side page in there, because they like to print, these pages in bundles that they can print faster and chop down faster.
Makes sense.
yeah, a big part of our first book, our first hardcover book, was going, we got to add more pages to it. We thought we had this finished product, and we were like so very wrong.
And I thought I was struggling when I had to try and get the start of a new chapter to go onto the right page and not just be in the middle.
Oh, it's a constant struggle. I do the graphic design and the editing for our books for that exact reason, because at the end of the day, you need to hit, if you're doing your books properly, right? If you're doing a physical book, you need to make sure stuff ends at like a 2-page like thing, that it's, ends at the bottom of the right-hand page or something like that, or that your sections are starting at the top left. So you actually need to be wary of 2 entire pages of content at a time. Even on digital stuff, you have to be wary of a single page of content. At the very minimum, you have to make sure that your sections aren't starting in the middle of a column.
Yeah.
So maybe you'll need to add some art into the corner. Maybe you're going to need to edit something down so that it doesn't spill over to the next page. So you're going to have to make these editing decisions as part of a graphic design process. So it's nice when your editor and the graphic designer share the same brain. Because, there's tricks, there's cheats, but really, it's nice just being able to trim a word in the right spot and fix things.
That's true. And I suppose that explains when you get that like super wide spaced, like one paragraph sometimes in books.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It is because a graphic designer had a heart attack. And it happens. Like, it is, sometimes you'll run into tough stuff. And if the graphic designer doesn't have the ability to add flavor text, like fill out a paragraph, or they don't have the ability to maybe trim a couple of wasted words to get stuff to fit properly, you'll end up with some messy graphic design. And this is the advantage of being a small company. I'm still small. Like I said, I wear so many hats. They're just towering above me, right? But all small designers have that advantage. You are the writer and editor and graphic designer until you make enough money to be otherwise. And that means you can do stuff like that. So you can have this super refined product because it's not getting passed from department to department. It's all in your hands, so you get to make sure that, it says everything you want and it ends at the right spot, and you get all of the tools in your tool belt to do that.
So I suppose then it comes down to, do you find it all worth it in the end? Is it satisfactory for you?
The making of the product, or?
I suppose just like all of the effort. Like, I mean, you've founded this incredible company you're finding success. You've got your first Kickstarter going. Is it worth it to be able to see that final product there in all its glory and like seeing it shipped out all over the world?
This is going to sound weird, but no, that's not really what it's about. I'm not making stuff to make a product to ship it all over the world. I'm making stuff so people can have fun at their table. It's worth it when somebody says, I'm playing Dark Matter right now, and I just rolled up an Amoeboid Wizard, and I'm having a great time, and my friends are having a great time. Because that's what it's there for. I didn't make something to be placed on a shelf or shipped all over the world. I made something that people can play with their friends so that they can have fun. And when I know that people are having fun, I know I've done the right thing.
That's a really good answer.
It's the only one that's right.
Well put. Okay, I think this is a good time for us to do a new feature on our show, the Homebrew Challenge. I'm going to roll a d10 and the result will be some piece of content for D&D. Your task is to come up with a homebrew based on that result. Think you're up to the challenge?
Sure, yeah. I mean, we can do one really fast.
Okay, here we go. That's a 10. So your challenge is to homebrew a location.
Interesting. Okay. So, locations are one of the few things that I don't have the opportunity to build very often, because I'm really interested in character options and stuff. With locations, you really want to follow the my grand idea of world building, which I call the powder keg principle. You want to build your worlds and your locations, all of your environments, like powder kegs waiting to explode. Make sure you have a warehouse stacked full of different powder kegs, any of which could go off at a moment's notice.
That's a great analogy.
So if the players are trying to go through them, they have to weave through this badly constructed warehouse where anything they nudge into will explode. This means it's instantly engaging. Now, I wouldn't say build for your actual location, fill it with powder kegs, but you should make sure that anything that happens has the potential to have repercussions and has interesting story implications. So a really great location, if I'm just pulling one off the top of my head, would be like a dam, like a wooden dam would be a super interesting place to start building around, because suddenly you have an entire locale that has the actual ability to break down and cause major damage.
Yeah,
Besides just the fact that if it breaks, it can harm the players, much like a bridge over a chasm. But if it breaks, it can damage an entire town. So there's an entire threat hinged into the location. Beyond that, you actually want to put some structures and something interesting to do there beyond just combat. So if the dam is doubling as a bridge, you might have a guard post there. But I tend to like putting in adventures that I write. I tend to like putting many things that you can interact with in a single location. I like to make it, if it's social, it's a sandbox. That's how I tend to build stuff. So I need to find something to place on top of that. If we get good and fantastical with it, it would not be hard to build an entire small settlement at the top of the dam, where there are windmills, and if you're playing something more Victorian, their electricity is generated by hydroelectric power.
Yeah, absolutely.
So instead of placing everything far away from those dams, you place it at the top. You can even find interesting ways of making it so that you end up with some sort of magical setup here that maybe it's not occupied by humanoids, maybe it's occupied by fairy creatures or something like that. So if we steer it in that direction, we might be able to find a giant beaver dam occupied by fairies and talking animals and other sprightly folk. And it's been there so long, all of the townsfolk that have that live literally 10, 20 miles down the river have no idea that it's magical in nature, and they just think it's been something, it's a structure that was built ages and ages past. If the players were fighting in this sort of area, they would have magical people that they could socialize with, but also magical threats to confront. And if at any point they used too much force or directed their force in the wrong spot, they might crack the dam and wipe out entire towns down the river, along with destroying the town that's there.
A mutual destruction kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, just absolutely disastrous. Unless you're playing an evil campaign, that completely throws out most of the assumptions you make when you're building stuff. But in a traditional campaign, that would be disastrous and is a true fail state. And often your fail states for Dungeons & Dragons shouldn't involve the players dying. It should involve something bad happening because they failed or because they've made a mistake. So
moral challenges.
Right. So having a small community of, magical shops and magical animals living on top of some sort of giant beaver dam, taking Narnia up to 11, might be a really interesting kind of location if we're just kind of, spitballing random ideas and then slapping it together into a fantasy map.
Fantastic. I think it's really good for people to be able to see how you actually go through the process rather than just talking about it, which we've done in past videos. So yeah, thank you very much, man. That was really well done. All right, well, let's bring it back down to earth and we'll reset with a nice simple one. What would you say is your favorite tabletop role-playing game?
Boy, that's tough. I mean, it would be cheating if I said anything other than D&D 5th edition. It's got the big advantages of, you can find players. I've dabbled with stuff that's powered by the apocalypse.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that all that, that collection of systems is a really good close second. It has that sort of genre focus that's really interesting and easy to pick up and play. But the biggest thing I like about Powered by the Apocalypse is that your entire character rule set is just on a sheet of paper.
Yeah.
Not just the rules that are specific for your character, but the whole system, front and back of one sheet of paper. That's amazing. If they make a 6th edition, I want that to be the selling point. That you print out this page, that's your character. Right? Maybe you go into an online editor and when you change your subclass, it changes the stuff on the page. But that's the coolest feature out there to me. So if there's a close second to D&D being the best system out there, it would be that flexibility and Powered by the Apocalypse systems being one page easy. Like, that's really cool to me.
Yeah, because I think one of the things that I've definitely loved about the little exposure I've had to the game is that each class, I guess you could call them, like, they call them roles or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
So each of these are basically a trope, like ripped straight out of TV tropes. Like, you have like the character archetype, and then all of your actions are the tropes that they can do.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. It's super genre heavy. And I think in some ways that may be too genre heavy, but it goes back to the way that we like to tell stories. I think there are systems that are, if we're talking about like my least favorite systems, they're the ones that don't give you enough guidance on what you're creating or how. You can apply as much imagination as you want to create this really wonderful thing, but if you give people an infinite sandbox, they're not going to make something cool. Right? That requires so much of what they're bringing into it. They don't have guidance to kind of pick up different tropes or be inspired to play a type of character. That's the nice thing about classes in D&D. You can look at them and go, pick one of those, and now you've got a really great starting point to make an interesting character, because it's got all sorts of stuff you know they can do, and types of characters that tend to fit this thing, and abilities that make that character better. So if you picked a ranger, you're probably going to be dexterous. That says a lot about your character already. If I gave you a super open system where here's 50 traits, pick them off a list, you're probably not going to find something super interesting in there. There's not enough guidance. So Powered by the Apocalypse has that benefit to it, and obviously 5th edition has a ton of benefit to that. But yeah, I think that's a really important, like, it avoids analysis paralysis.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that, I think analysis paralysis is one of those things that I have a weird relationship with it, because I've definitely had it at times. Obviously, coming from 3.5, it was everywhere. Like, but you almost had to learn to cope with it back then. So I don't know if I've just learned to cope with it better over the years, and like now it doesn't bother me so much, or if it's just something that I don't encounter as often in the same magnitude I was used to.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it has different. It looks different at different scales. Right? If you find you didn't make a terribly inspired character because you didn't feel guided toward a particular archetype because the system didn't give you like something to pick off of a list, right? If a system basically says, here's a role-playing game, pick a noun and 2 adjectives, that's your character. Like, that's not enough guidance, right? You're not giving me something that's like super compelling to pick up and play. You're not doing any of the work for me. And part of the game does need to do that work of storytelling for you. It needs to guide you into telling an interesting story. Well,
I think you just described the White Wolf systems.
Yep. Those are out there. And I'm not saying there's anything fundamentally wrong with that, but it is a different mindset to the way that I play and that the people I play with typically bring to the system. They're not there to play... They're not there to write a novel where they invent the main character from scratch and like figure out all their personality traits. They're not coming to it with that kind of full writing mindset that I am going to make this grand story and I'm going to build this character and have no limitations on what they're like. We're typically fine with limitations because limitations guide our creative pursuits to interesting places. So a lot of what you're doing when you're writing is kind of setting up these You're setting up these mechanics to point toward interesting story opportunities. You're kind of aiming them at one another. You're not just, building a big flat empty plane.
That's a good point. And yeah, I think it is an important distinction for D&D in that, you want your character isn't necessarily ever going to need to be as in-depth as a White Wolf character would be. I mean, White Wolf is purely predicated on like big sprawling stories with deep characters that are incredibly nuanced, and the character sheets represent that, right? Like you can have very specific skills picked out from these really like long lists and very in-depth in what particular abilities you do and don't have, whereas D&D is straight to the point. It's like a different TV show. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Because if you think of White Wolf as like the period piece like film, then D&D is very much the action movie. Like, you don't need to know the characters as much as you need to know their motivations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if you're playing a rogue and your rogue fits a typical kind of rogue archetype, nobody is going to complain about that because it helps them tell their own stories more effectively because they know basically what you're about. It makes the twists that much more exciting as well. But I think most people don't... Oh, yeah. So if you're playing a rogue and, you play a typical rogue archetype, nobody's really going to complain because it kind of makes their own characters that much easier to define because they know what you're about completely, right? You're not exploring these characters in their three-dimensionality. It makes the story that much easier to tell. And I think that is really where we engage with media more often, right? We typically only, regurgitate the tales that we've been told. And so much of our media diet is TV and movies that we're not used to characters that take 300 hours or 30 or 40 hours to really come to life. We want characters that are pretty easily recognizable so we can get right into the fun stuff, especially with something like Dungeons and Dragons, where the fun stuff is like the point of why you're there. You want to roll dice and use those character traits on your character sheet, right?
Yeah.
It's both, natural for us to do that in the modern gaming space and also desirable.
Absolutely. And I think so many of the people that I've met who are DMs, they typically always seem to structure their games in the context of like a TV show. Like every game you play is an episode, every arc of the story becomes like a season of it. And maybe if you could count that by levels, even like levels 1 to 5 is one season, 5 to 8 is another. And there seems to be a natural...
Yeah, it's absolutely natural. It's how I run my games. There was actually, I learned it from Chris Perkins, weirdly enough. He had an article series back on the Wizards of the Coast website, which you can look up if you want. It was called The DM Experience. And I learned everything I know about DMing from that article series.
Oh, wow.
And it was a super, Chris Perkins, amazing DM everybody knows because of Penny Arcade. He also did a ton of writing for The Monster Manual in 5th edition. I haven't met a ton of people from, Wizards of the Coast, but that's one of my people I absolutely want to just hang out with, have a beer sometime. Because everything I know about Dungeons and Dragons comes somewhere from his brain, just kind of echoed around the gaming space, I suppose. So it's a very natural way of telling that. Clearly that idea has been around for a while.
Yeah, I suppose for the most part, when we're trying to figure all this stuff out as DMs, I at least am very guilty of just stealing everything that I know. A majority of my innovation just comes from taking two cool ideas other people have had and just slap them together. And
sure. That's what creativity is. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
Yeah. They were... There's the old saying that you can't have any unique ideas, they've already been had and all that. I think it is true to some extent. But yeah, I think definitely when we're pulling our ideas as DMs for being able to make sense of all of this stuff, you need to be able to fall back on those structures that are innately already in pop culture and that you're so familiar with. And it makes just running the game so much smoother if you start doing it.
As a designer, that is key as well. Right, you have this kind of short space in order to explain the kind of characters that you can create with this subclass or base class or feat or whatever. So you need to rely on the things that the players already are bringing to the game, and frankly, that's a big part of games in general, right? D&D is not a thing that is kind of expanding out in front of you. You only get out of D&D what you put into it. So as a designer, you need to meet people halfway. You need to approach them with tropes that they're familiar with and genres that they enjoy and are familiar with in order for them to get the most out of it. That's natural for DMs, it's natural for players, and it should be natural for designers. Do not try to blow anyone's mind with something so original it takes many paragraphs to explain it unless it pays for its length and complexity with enjoyment. Everything has that cost and it needs to pay itself off.
Yeah, it's good advice. And speaking of good advice, I suppose it's a good time to ask you then, what would you say are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned from your time in brewing?
Trying to find the right kind of takeaway for this. Let me think. Because I've learned a lot. I've learned a hell of a lot. I didn't come into homebrewing knowing anything. And the nice thing about my blog is that it is this gigantic backlog of, from the very beginning to where I am now. And you get to see every mistake I've made and everything I've learned along the way. Oh, you know what it is? I know exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's that your writing can't be precious. Your ideas are not precious. If somebody misunderstands something, it's not their fault, it's yours, even if you explained it the right way. You have to be able to take something that you love and cut it, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts. This is, you run into writers all the time, like young writers, new writers. In D&D and outside of D&D, I'm just saying this is a writer thing. They have this ego, this pride, that their ideas are precious and unique, and that is somehow important. And you need to understand that your ideas are neither precious nor unique, and that it's not important. So if you made a mistake, own up to it and fix it. And if somebody says you made a mistake and you don't think you did, you still probably made a mistake. And that you need to find a way to acknowledge that and deal with it. It's a really hard thing to do, but when you make stuff on the internet, everybody gets a say in it. And they're right, you're not. And you need to get really good at kind of acknowledging that and dealing with it. You have to be able to, look at something you love and cut it, even when it's something that's really fantastic. It's just part of the thing.
It's almost having a level of humility.
Yeah, I mean, it's a brutal humility. It hurts. And you kind of get a thick skin once you've, cut things enough. Part of this is when you make a good product, sometimes you have to cut stuff for length, right? It has to get cut. When you're making a good product, sometimes you have to cut something for balance, even if it's like really interesting in other ways. Sometimes you just have to cut stuff, for completely other reasons. But don't be afraid to remove something. Don't be afraid to cut it. Don't be afraid to admit that you're wrong and fix things and go back and throw out tons of work. Because at the end of the day, it's about making that product. Don't think your ideas are precious or good. They're probably not.
Wise words indeed.
It's a really brutalist idea. It's a really brutalist approach to things, and it's never good advice to hear. But it's something, if you internalize it, then you can maybe find ways to improve.
No, I think that's definitely something that people need to hear. Not all medicine tastes sweet.
Yeah. And it'll pay off in the long run too. It's one of those things that you can't, until you learn to start taking your lumps, you're not going to really start improving as much as you think you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you definitely have to be able to receive criticism, or you're not going to survive the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's, man, I had to learn that real early. And I've seen people who have been at it just as long as I have, and they haven't quite learned that lesson yet. And it's heartbreaking because, it's that kind of acknowledgement that the customer's always right. If you don't understand why that saying exists, even in contexts in which things are free, then you're maybe not going to thrive on the internet. It's important to know that you're in an internet environment, right? You need to make sure that people feel like they're heard. If they took the time to talk to you, to say something about your product to you, or just to a comment section, that's valid. And you need to make sure that you respond in kind and treat them like they are on your level. Even if you think that they are a dolt. You're gonna run into that more often than not. And it's a big part. Maybe this is just part of me having grown up a little bit since starting this, but, it's important to approach people on the internet like they're there in the room with you.
That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, and it's important to be able to remember that you may not necessarily like the audience, but they are the people that you're making the products for, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to you earn the audience that you get. You know, I've got a really wonderful audience that follows us. I've been extremely lucky in that way as well. But I think part of it is that we don't stand bullies. We don't stand, we don't put up with the wrong type of people, and we make sure we foster an environment that's good for everybody. And when you start from that perspective, it's hard to get an audience that is just going to be vicious and hateful all the time. So, when it comes to your audience, you kind of get what you deserve, for good and for ill.
That's definitely interesting to hear. And I think that is something that I've found is consistent throughout all of the interviews I've had so far, is that everyone that I've spoke to seems to have cultivated their own community.
You have to. Yeah, if you've seen... everybody who has started writing for Dungeons & Dragons or writing for anything online has seen the wider world of people who read and comment on stuff. And the internet is a vicious place, right? So when you've cultivated a place where people are kind and thoughtful and give good feedback and are nice to one another, like, that's a different animal to the rest of the internet. So you've gotten there when you suddenly have this different group. So we've all experienced that other side of it, and we know that we have this really wonderful group. And I imagine there are people out there who don't keep doing this because they never cultivate that sort of group, or they just get unlucky in the types of people that follow them.
Mm.
And I can only imagine, I've dodged some sort of bullet when it comes to that. A YouTuber, a fairly large YouTuber that I was speaking with, who has a massive following on YouTube, I won't name names, told me at one point that he wanted to get away from doing D&D stuff on YouTube because he didn't like the audience that was following him. And that was tragic. Now, he still is doing D&D stuff, but he's migrated to other things as well. And I feel for him, because we've got a really wonderful, like, D&D is a wonderful community out there, but not everybody, has your best interests at heart.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think, like, even, over the years, like, if you think of Critical Role, like, they are nothing but wonderful people as far as I can tell. Like, everything I've seen of them is just, like, they're so kind and caring for their community. And yet, over the years, there have absolutely been moments where you see, like, people straight up attacking them just because of maybe, like, things that happen in narrative or comment made by someone, obviously not intended the way that it was heard. But you, even in, like, the nicest communities, you still have to cultivate and manage things and maintain, I suppose, your scruples as you go.
Yeah. It says a lot about who you are when you pick the people who you kind of, sometimes you throw people out, right? Of your Discord, of your comment section, of your community. You have to draw the line in the sand. And if you don't, then, you'll end up with everybody. And that I mean everybody in the worst way.
Mm-hmm.
This is obviously like a, wildly different topic again, but when you wear a lot of hats as a creator, you also have to know how to manage, entire communities of folks, and you have to be a moderator and a mediator, and you have to be knowledge about the politics of your country and around the world. You have to know everything. You're going to treat people fairly, and it's about treating people fairly.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got the Mage Hand Press Discord. How deeply involved with that have you been over the years?
Oh, ever since we launched it, I've been on there basically every day. I go there when I need advice about things. I go there when I want to tell people I'm having a great day. The people in my Discord are extremely wonderful people, and they give good, thoughtful advice. And the thing they get from that is that their ideas, sometimes they're like words and features, end up in our books. And that, it's a great little feedback mechanism, right? You get people who are interested and engaged, and they get repaid in kind.
Yeah, it's very much a mutual arrangement.
Yeah, correct. And I think you'll see that all of the creators you'll have on here that with any large following probably have a passionate fan base somewhere. Maybe not on Discord. Maybe it's on Reddit. Maybe it's on Twitter. Somewhere. They have people who care deeply about their work and what they do. If you make stuff that is good, you're probably going to inspire that sort of passion in people. I mean, I hope you do. And I hope you do that as well. But you have to, I think the big thing is you have to know how to deal with people. That's probably an issue in our industry. And hopefully it's something that's changing. I find that a lot of creators don't, I don't know, they come from like a nerdy space. Like, I
think that's fair to say.
I was a math tutor before I started writing Dungeons and Dragons full time. I am a gigantic nerd. Like, yeah, we watch Marvel movies and we play dice games. Like, we're not extremely sociable folks. We probably didn't win Homecoming King and Queen, but, you still have to know how to deal with people. And that's like an entire social side of your personality. You have to grow out and develop and be like an adult about. If you're going to be big in, anything, if you're going to be successful, you need to know that.
It's true. Or you become successful enough to pay someone who is capable of it.
It's never going to happen. I think you see people in the bigger industry working for Wizards of the Coast that thought that was going to be their solution out of this. Oof, and eventually people learn that you don't have that side of your, personality figured out. And it fucking explodes in your face. I'm sorry if I shouldn't be swearing here.
It's okay.
I mean, it's, I mentioned earlier, you're not just, going to get paid to write stuff, and you're certainly never going to make enough money that people aren't going to know who you are, like personally as a person. It's not going to happen. So you need to make sure that, like, people will deal with you as a person, as a creator, because, you're making stuff, but you as a person are attached to that. And people will have to give you a thumbs up as well as your work if they're going to engage with it.
Absolutely. I think this kind of falls back onto like some very classic advice a lot of parents pass on to their kids, and certainly mine did, is that it's absolutely fine for you to have dreams and you should absolutely pursue them, but just not as a full-time job.
Oh yeah.
You gotta have you gotta have your job and you have your hobby, and your hobby is the thing that, like, you can be the creative thing, like the music, the writing, anything that you want, but the job needs to be the job. You need to be able to have something to pay the bills.
Yeah, and it's important to know, like, I can sit here and say, like, I am currently doing writing for Dungeons and Dragons as a full-time job. Yeah, it's still a hobby, but it no longer, like, I don't engage with D&D the same way that you do when you're having fun with it. Don't think that this, like, I am engaging with this as a hobby anymore. It's, like, not the same thing. It is no longer, I'm not doing my hobby as a job. Like, I'm doing it as a job. Like, that thing has become a job. It's no longer a hobby anymore. So, like, no, if you really want to buy into this idea that you're going to do it as a, as a job, like you want to do this as your career, you have to know you're giving something up for that. You're giving that sort of carefree kind of like, I'm having fun with friends kind of mentality. Sometimes you're going to sit down and playtest stuff like when you're not feeling like D&D, and you have to do it because it's your freaking job now.
Yeah. That was a really hard lesson I learned when I worked for Sega for a bit as a games tester. Like,
oh wow.
If you've ever played video games and loved it, it's a whole different thing when you play video games that you don't like, and you have to. Yeah, QA is brutal. And yeah, oh my god, man. And when you're writing stuff for Dungeons and Dragons, you are your own QA team. You have to read over everything, play test it, build characters with every single mechanic you make in order to make sure that it works. And then you don't have a QA team to do it for you, so you have to be as thorough as possible. I edit everything 2 or 3 times before it goes to print. I edit it 2 or 3 times myself, send it to a copy editor, and then do more editing passes, along with like balance passes. Like, my Discord gets to rip me a new one every time I put out something that has even the smallest
even the smallest like inconsistency in balance. And that sort of perfectionism is really important in D&D because the community is like nerds who really care for that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, there's always going to be someone who knows the math better than you, who can like run through the simulations quicker. And that person is going to be commenting on your work as soon as it gets put on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, ideally that person is me. Like, I mean, genuinely, I try to be, I come from a math background. I come from a computer science background. I know this stuff inside and out. And I'm a perfectionist. I want everything to be perfect. So when I was talking about the blasters in Dark Matter and how I made them perfect, I mean that in a mathematical objective sense. They are on par with regular weapons when you get them at first level. Like, mathematically. In spite of the fact that they use a completely different system for calculating damage. And that took a lot of iterations, and I threw away a lot of good stuff. I take that very seriously. And your audience is going to take it seriously, so if you're not willing to engage with it on that level, they're going to destroy you.
It's true. And there are a few people in this world who hold a higher standard than nerds.
Yeah. That's a good point. You have a very anal audience.
Pros and cons.
Maybe there are D&D people who don't. Maybe there are people who are making stuff that is just like throw your hands into the air willy-nilly, we're just going to have a good time. I haven't met them. And there is probably an area for that out there, right?
And I suppose, yeah, if you want that as your audience, then try and cultivate it. But I think the majority of us want people that want to care about what we're making.
I don't think that they wouldn't. I think if you go to a place like Imager or maybe Twitter and you find the right spheres to kind of post stuff in, you can find an audience that is more there about, fun, willy-nilly concepts, right? That you can just build monsters that are memes and subclasses that are jokes and mechanics that are funny and like, barely functional. Like, you can probably find a place for that. But that's not where the majority of the community is. And you will find nerds who come to your stuff and destroy it. They're like, this is terrible. If you play with this, people will have less fun. There is this weird idea in D&D space that things have to be balanced to be fun. And that's not actually true. It's more complicated than that. Like, it's way more complicated than that, as you can kind of imagine by the weird supposition that things being equal equals fun. Like that. Well, that's not logical. Like that.
I'd say two things come to mind. First, what is the equation for fun? And secondly, that the old quote from, I can't remember who said it originally, that your fun is wrong. Like the idea that there is many different kinds of fun.
What I will say is unbalance is often a doorway to other people at the table having a bad time.
True.
Right?
True.
If you're dealing more damage than the rogue, and you're doing similar stuff, but you don't have to follow sneak attack restrictions or anything like that, and you're just out damaging them every round, that rogue is the player who is playing a rogue character will be very upset with you and upset with the game because they don't get to feel special doing cool stuff. So there's something to that idea that balance is part of the alchemy of fun. But, fun isn't alchemy, right? Sometimes things are just wildly fun. So we have a gunslinger class I mentioned is a crit fisher, and uses that interesting, gun system that we've created. That class is one of the most fun things I've ever made. It is wildly fun. It is deeply fun. Everyone who picks it up, it's one of their favorite classes of all time. And I get it. I've playtested it. It has no reason to be as fun as it is. I didn't put in extra work or extra balancing or crazy mechanics. It's just good. And it's just the way the alchemy works. You get crit fishing in the class, so the critical hits feel great, and they work even better with the dice that you have. You have just enough options to feel like you have a lot of space to play with, but the class isn't too complicated. Things just worked. And it's just, on accident, really well, better than almost anything I've made. And it took less effort. And it's still super unique. Like, alchemy. I didn't come up with that. It just kind of self-formed around good ideas. It's more than the sum of its parts in a wildly different way. And I think you could objectively measure that is more fun than most things, but I don't think you can objectively engineer fun. You can weigh the scales in your favor, right? You can build something that will sink, right? But you can't build something you know will float. This actually goes back to how I playtest. If you think you're going to catch your balance mistakes in playtesting, you're wrong. Playtesting is not for that. That is balance you check on a spreadsheet. Like, yeah, do not check your balance. I mean, your balance makes sure that you did the spreadsheet correctly. Your playtesting. Your playtesting ensures that you did your spreadsheet correctly, but it doesn't ensure that you balanced it. Your playtesting is to measure one variable, and that's fun. Your playtesting is to make sure it's fun. If it's not fun enough, you go back to the drawing board and rework stuff. Your balance should be done before you playtest. Tons of people do this differently. I think some of them have good reasons for it. Most of them don't. It's because they don't want to do the balancing work. They don't want to do the hard math before they get to the table. But you should do that, because until it's super mathematically balanced, you can't objectively measure whether it's fun for that player and the players around them. You're not just measuring whether that class is fun to play for them, you're measuring the whole table. And that's super important, especially if you make something that's too strong. That player will have a a really great time. Everyone around them will hate it, including the DM. Also, don't DM when you're playtesting, don't DM it. Be a player at the table, but don't DM it.
That's a good point, actually.
Or play it. Yeah, that's a whole other thing, right? Because the bigger thing you have to worry about is everyone having a good time, right? And you'll be able to tell that if you can read the room.
And dealing with your own bias.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Well, and part of it is part of fun is, did the person understand their mechanics and when to use them, and did they have a good time building that character and inhabiting that character? Because if you build a class that is not fun to roleplay, it's not fun. I'm saying it again, the point here is to figure out the alchemy of fun. That's what the playtesting is for. You should not be doing anything else. You are not checking to make sure that the damage rolls are correct, although playtesting can show that in practice, or that a mechanic feels exploitative or unfair, or like you're cheating. Yeah, playtesting will reveal that. But it's not there to show that you did the math right. Your math should be obvious.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, that's all charts and graphs. You can compare that to everything that already exists very easily.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to do more complicated charts and graphs in order to make sure you're comparing all the elements of it. Our gunslinger was difficult to balance because crit fishing has very different very different damage calculations than everything else that has consistent critical hits. So we had to do an entire separate set of balancing for checking that their damage is correct when you account for critical hits. But that's not what the playtesting was for. The playtesting is this fun? I have scrapped a lot of ideas because it was not actually fun at the actual table when we playtested it. And you will make bad stuff if you do not have the courage to do that.
That's really well put, I think.
People will disagree with me up and down about when you playtest, though. Putting this online, I know I've collected this massive group of comments that are just going to hit you immediately when people get to it. But I stand by it. That is how I balance stuff objectively outside of the playtesting process.
Because I think I've been watching Matthew Colville's stuff. He does the Twitch streams occasionally. But he talks very regularly about what's going on with his latest, I think it was a Kickstarter he did for it's like a warfare system.
Strongholds and...
Strongholds and Followers was the first one. This one is Kingdoms and Warfare.
Gotcha.
And one of the things he's been talking about in his recent updates is that he's been working on balancing the warfare systems, and he talks very extensively about how rather than playtesting, he actually runs it through a simulator. One of his followers programmed a simulation system so he can put in all the different arrangements of units and stuff, put them up against another army, and then run that simulation X thousand times and just see all the results printed out on a spreadsheet, which is a really interesting way of doing things.
I don't know if that is better. I genuinely don't. I've never put in full-on simulator work before. In D&D, for classes, it wouldn't make sense. Because your classes are not fighting against one another, right? They are cooperating. So if you start going, well, this class has the ability to resist spells and only these spells in the player's handbook, affect it. Well, that's not really what you're talking about. They're not against spells in the player's handbook. They're against monsters. So it's sort of a different animal. And there's a concept in computer science of overfitting when you're talking about AIs, which is that you can build a solution that is too robust or too specific to your data set, and it's not robust enough to handle different data sets. Simulations might be a gateway to overfitting, but I believe what Matt Colville is probably doing is something more broad. He's probably building units for players and enemies alike, so you want to make sure they're all equal in practice.
Yeah, I believe that is more along the lines. But this is a different animal as well. Most people, anybody who's listening to this, you're not building computer simulations for your classes and subclasses. It's not happening. I know for a fact it's not for you. It's not for me, and I get paid to do this, right? It's not part of my job, and if you're doing it, you're probably getting off track somewhere. Because coming up with novel mechanics should be, and not just like good and balanced, but novel, like interesting stuff, should be like the vast majority of your time. Balancing it, once you're good at it, doesn't take very long. I'm assuming if you're building stuff as a D&D creator, you're at least okay at math. And then the last bit of it is putting it at the table and see if it's fun. And if it's not fun, throw it out, start on something else. That's the process. There's no magic to it. It's just being good at identifying when something fails horribly. For sure. And I mean, certainly for the average person, you don't have necessarily like a fan who is also a computer programmer who can whip together something in Java. And
I honestly, you'd be surprised. There's probably more of those people than you think. One of the guys who was editing my stuff is just finished his computer science degree and did an entire senior project on AI. Like, he could definitely do that. And if I asked him, he could whip it up in like an hour. But like, it's not necessary. I wouldn't get anything out of that, right? I would be better spent my time rather than going over a data sheet and looking at damage percentages, like, kill death ratios and stuff like that. Making novel, interesting, like non-parallel mechanics that make the system feel broader and more interesting. Like, I haven't even touched on novelty versus balance, right? The idea that novelty is something that you want to have in most of your designs so that people look at it and go, ooh, I've never seen that before. That's really important, but that's an entirely different subject.
And you certainly must get a lot more character out of a good old-fashioned handmade homebrew.
Yeah. I think part of D&D is that it's not too balanced. There are classes that are better than other classes, and this is widely known.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it gives the system a bit of character. I believe, and don't quote me on this because I didn't play 4th edition, but this was a complaint in 4th edition. People did not love the way that things were perhaps too finely balanced between all of the classes. They all felt the same to play. You all got powers. You all got at-will abilities.
Yeah, my understanding is that a big criticism was that they'd finally figured out how to make wizards brought down to the level of everything else, or bring everything else up to the level of wizard, so that you didn't necessarily have that disparity, but it kind of bled out into everything. So even like magic items, if you had, like, you were expected to get specific bonuses at specific levels from having equipment. So it didn't matter if I played this adventure and you played that adventure, we'd end up with the same things because it was required.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So yeah, it was not very form-fitting.
It's this idea earlier that having things be balanced is not the same as having them be fun. Like, you need variation. You need some things to be a little bit stronger than other things. But, as a rule, don't make anyone at the table feel bad. That's, why we playtest. That's something that you can't tell from spreadsheets is, will this feel bad? Will this feel good? That's what playtesting is for. The D&D, it's, Wizards of the Coast has made these mistakes throughout time, and you can learn a lot by going back to earlier editions and seeing how they approach stuff, seeing how people reacted. It's kind of like generational market research.
That's a good point. Awesome, man. So do you have any upcoming projects you wanted to mention, or anything that's currently in the woodwork?
Yeah, sure. You can still pre-order Dark Matter. The backer kit just went out, so everyone can still access the pre-order store. If you look up Dark Matter on Kickstarter, it's the starter kit. Kickstarter just wrapped up a few weeks ago, and you can still pre-order the Dark Matter starter kit and the Dark Matter hardcover. We have more Kickstarters coming down the line next year. And we should have plenty of cool projects coming out on our Patreon, which is Mage Hand Press. If you follow Mage Hand Press on Twitter or go to magehandpress.com, you're going to find a lot of really fun D&D stuff completely for free. And if you want to throw a couple of bucks at us, you'll find extremely high quality stuff for, pennies on the dollar.
Brilliant, man. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been really great having this conversation. We could go on for hours, I'm sure.
I think we could. Thank you so much for having me and letting me talk your ears off. I think a lot about this stuff, and I really enjoy kind of talking about it. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, this was a blast. Thank you for having me.
No worries. Thank you again for coming on, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
All right, cool. See you, Nick.
Best of luck.
Bye.
Thanks again to Mike for sparing time to chat with us, and of course the most special thanks goes to you for making it all the way to the end. I have a handful of new interviews being recorded this week with some very exciting guests lined up, from published authors to community favourites, all of which I'm very excited to sit down with and talk shop. Remember to comment and let me know any questions you'd like asked in the future or topics you'd like to hear our thoughts on. But for now, that's the end of the show. So until the next adventure, stay safe.